Did you know that a simple cup of coffee could be the only clue a judge needs to know if an event is going to be well run or a potential disaster? Let me explain. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about judges. Yes, they are a fundamental piece at any CrossFit competition or CrossFit clone, not technically CrossFit, but we all know it's CrossFit competition. And yet, unless they mess up on a live stream, we rarely speak about them. And if you have no intention of ever judging at a CrossFit competition, before you switch off, what if I told you that judges could be a great litmus test for anyone going to a competition? Not just to judge, but even for an athlete or a spectator. So stick around to see why that is. Within the CrossFit space, we often hear people talking about the need for the sport to be more professional, and they talk a lot about the athletes and whether or not they are professional athletes, but rarely do we talk about the judges and their role. Moreover, we see more and more off-season competitions springing up, from pretty big competitions to smaller local events, but one thing that they all have in common is the need for judges. So what is it then that will get judges to a competition and, more importantly, get them to go back the following year? Or conversely, what are the turn-offs, the things that will stop them going back to an event? And how does a cup of coffee fit into all of this? So I put the call out to judges to let me know what they thought about all of this, and they didn't hold back. I received a number of messages, and I want to dive into the things that they really liked, the most common requests they had from competitions, the big turn-offs or things that would stop them going back, or even things that as soon as they see it, they know, oh dear, this is a sign that I'm not going to have a good day or 2 days of competition. And then this important lesson of what we can learn from their keen observation of competitions and how it benefits all of us, even if we have no intention of judging ourselves. So let's start with what I assume most people would consider the big issue, and that is money. Do judges want money? Do they want to be paid for judging? Well, yes, of course, if you're going to offer them money, they want it. So if a competition is saying they're going to pay judges and actually pays them, well, then that is a positive thing. But it is not the deciding factor. So, of course, judges appreciate it. The cost of travel has gone up. The cost of accommodation is something they need to factor in. So if a competition is willing to cover that or at least put something towards that, that is going to be a positive mark for judges. But even if a competition is paying their judges, when we think of how much time these judges are giving the competition, if we were to break it down into an hourly rate, it would be pretty embarrassing. So definitely no one is judging because they want to get rich. So if that is not the determining factor, what is? Well, one of the biggest things that people kept saying was respect, or feeling valued by the competition, understanding that they are volunteers. They're giving up their time so you can have a competition. And when a competition organizer includes things like showing respect for the judges, listening to your judges, not being rude or insulting to your judges in the athlete briefing, or making it clear that that will not be tolerated, that is a positive thing for judges. On the other hand, if a competition sides with an athlete or throws a judge under the bus, maybe to protect a big name, well, that is a definite red flag for judges. They need to feel that the competition has their back, that they are supporting them in the decisions and calls they are making. And really, they just want to feel valued for what they're doing. Now, of course, it's very easy at the end of a competition, maybe during the podiums, to say a few words to thank the judges and the volunteers for everything they're doing and a big round of applause for their hard work to make them feel valued. But by this point, they will know if they were truly valued or not. So now we could get on to the biggest issue. The thing I heard most, whether it was in a positive light or a negative light, it all came down to this. And it's also the thing that can benefit us if we know how judges feel about the competitions in this regard, if we're planning to be there as an athlete or even a spectator. But before I get to that, it's a good opportunity to remind you to like the video if you haven't already, share it around, subscribe to the channel. If you want to support me over on Patreon, there will be a link at the end of this video. So what was the biggest thing that judges mentioned? Organization. Well, thanks for watching the video, and I hope to see you in a future one. No, I won't just stop at organization. We should go deeper, shouldn't we? Because there's a number of factors involved when we talk about the organization of a competition, a number of things that can make it a great competition or a terrible competition. And about 90% of those will probably affect us if we are there as a spectator or an athlete. So it's definitely worth knowing what judges think about these competitions. For example, what if a competition starts to think, wouldn't it be cool or special if we put our own spin on this movement? So now a movement that is maybe something commonly done by athletes, commonly judged by judges, has a unique standard. And perhaps that standard is not clearly explained to the judges right there in the moment. Maybe it's not fully understood by the athletes. And now we have an issue because it's also most likely counterintuitive to what would normally be considered a rep or no rep, all for the sake of spectacle. Now, if things aren't communicated clearly to the judges, to the athletes, what will we see in the competition? Well, we will have judges making slightly different calls. That's not enjoyable for the judge, that's not enjoyable for the different athletes, and as a spectator, it's just confusing. And if you're doing this and at the same time requiring that judges are there with a judge's cert or a level 1 or something like that, it's even more egregious. Because you want them to know the standards, but then you're applying different standards to CrossFit. Of course, if a competition does want to change a standard for some reason, of course they're free to do that, but judges would appreciate clear communication well in advance so that they are all on the same page with how they're judging that movement. Now, of course, you've got your head judge who will oversee all of this, and that could be another issue. You can have two extremes, a head judge that is on a power trip or a head judge that just doesn't want to upset anyone, so doesn't say anything. And both can be problematic. What we want is a head judge that is somewhere in the middle. Yes, they are making sure that everyone is following the standard. They are communicating clearly. They are a conduit between the event and the judges, but they also realize they too are human and all the judges are volunteers and they're treating them with the respect and dignity they deserve. And that's probably a good lesson for us if we are watching competitions at home over a live stream or even in person and we see a judge making a bad call and we start to get angry with that judge. Just remember that the head judge should be there fixing that issue. So if this thing keeps going, let's not get too angry with that judge. Maybe someone else is responsible. But let's drill down into the organizing of volunteers themselves, or more specifically, how the judges are organized. Because if a competition hasn't got enough judges, whether that be they weren't able to get enough judges, or they just didn't understand how many they needed, or they've put in too many heats, or whatever the problem may be. If we start seeing judges being overworked, doing too many heats in a row, not having a chance to have a break for something to eat, something to drink, well then that's going to be a pretty bad experience for them. But what about for an athlete? If you are in the final heat of the final event and your judge is hangry, it's probably not going to be the best experience for you either. But what about this cup of coffee that I've mentioned? Am I just talking about providing refreshments? Well, no, although providing refreshments was definitely something that judges were keen that competitions do, make sure they've got plenty of tea, coffee, if they can provide a lunch or something like that as well, that's a bonus. But the cup of coffee that I'm talking about, well, actually, it's more an indication of attention to detail. For example, if an event puts on a judge's briefing and it's very early in the morning, it means cafes are not yet open for them to get a coffee, hotels maybe are not yet providing breakfast services, so these judges are arriving, they've had to skip that morning cup of coffee. When they arrive at the venue, that will be very telling. Have the organizers thought about this? Have they set up a tea and coffee station so volunteers can get a drink and be adequately caffeinated and alert for the briefing? Or have they just not thought about the fact that decisions they've made and times they've picked for their event have an effect on the wider world? It's such a small detail, I know, but this attention to detail is vital for events to run on time. Are they thinking about how much time it takes to get people off the competition floor, to get new people onto the competition floor, to change equipment, to move people maybe from one location to another? Because when these things go wrong, we get that knock-on effect and we start to see heats overrunning, events overrunning. So that athlete that had booked a 5 o'clock train because they knew that the final event was at 4, well, that train is probably not waiting for them when they start the final heat at 4:45, for example. And I get that maybe this coffee thing is just a small detail, but when you hear about events that are providing their judges microwavable meals when they are judging the outside event, which means they have no access to a microwave, you can understand why attention to detail, when overlooked, is a real big problem for judges. Now, obviously, this is not a comprehensive list of do's and don'ts from judges or for judges. But the principle is really this. If someone is running an event, don't ruin it for the judges. Because judges, guess what? They speak to one another. They have WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, Instagram pages where they are giving each other information. If an event starts to get a bad reputation, guess what? They're going to start to struggle to get judges. And if you're an athlete attending an event that doesn't have enough judges, that's not just a bad experience for the judges, that's going to be a bad experience for you. But a good thing about this for an athlete is if they plan to participate at an event they've never gone to before, it could well be worth finding a judge that's judged at that event. Ask them about their experience because they know the behind the scenes, and that will be an excellent indicator for how well things are going to run for you as an athlete as well. I suppose a final note could be that judging is hard. Finding judges can be difficult. We see more and more competitions cropping up, and they all need judges. Judges, as I've said, are a fundamental piece of CrossFit competition. And we cannot expect the same people to give up every single weekend of the year traveling around at their own expense so that we can have CrossFit competitions throughout the year. So a good question could be, what can judges, competitions, local boxes do to get more people involved in judging? Because as much as people talk about wanting to professionalize CrossFit and make it a more professional sport and bigger and have more events and more eyes on it, unless we increase the number of judges, that will always be a limiting factor. Now, I know that a number of competitions are making efforts to try and make sure they are providing for the judges. They're making it a good experience that will not only bring them back, but perhaps encourage them to bring along a friend who maybe hasn't tried judging before. It's also nice when we get to see people like Lucy Campbell, that was spotted at a couple of events recently, judging. It's a great experience for the athletes because, wow, I got to get judged by a games athlete, but it's also nice for them because it really embeds them back as part of the community, where maybe their training doesn't allow them to be as much as a part of their box as it would for the likes of you and me. But as I said, this is not a comprehensive list. Once again, I feel like I'm just opening the floor for discussion. So feel free to comment below. Are you a judge? What do you like? Why do you do it? What's putting you off? Have you stopped judging for some reason? Feel free to fill the comments below. And even if you're not a judge, but you've got thoughts and opinions, please let me know those in the comments as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in a future video.